second panel, Dr. Robert Sharf is a professor of Buddhist study at the University of Berkeley and specializing in topics from medieval Chinese Buddhism to Buddhism modernism. And his topic is, can AI meditate and why it matters? Let's welcome Professor Sharf.
Thank you. My talk is 23 minutes, so take a deep breath. And I'm sorry I don't have this is old school, no PowerPoint. There's been a lot of excitement over AI of late, with some folks claiming that it is just a matter of time before the current generation of AI morphs into artificial general intelligence, at which point we should concede that the AI system is, for all intents and purposes, sentient or even conscious. Some go further, declaring that we are on the verge of an AI singularity in which AI intelligence will leapfrog that of humans, ushering in, for better or worse, a new age. But there are reasons, historical, technical, philosophical, and so on, for caution. So let's start with a bit of a historical perspective. It is notoriously challenging to extrapolate into the future on the basis of current scientific technological advancements, as the import of such achievements may turn out to be exaggerated. Think, for example, of the hype surrounding the Miller-Urey experiments in the early 1950s, experiments that seem to corroborate what is known as the primordial soup theory of the origin of life. This theory, which dates back to the 1920s, holds that living organisms evolved on Earth a few billion years ago, emerging naturally from inorganic compounds that made up the Earth's prebiotic atmosphere. In 1953, Stanley Miller created a mixture of such compounds and zapped it with an electric arc, simulating a lightning strike. And the experiment produced monomers, including basic amino acids that are essential to life as we know it. The findings generated considerable media attention. And if you believe the press coverage, scientists were on the verge of synthesizing life in the lab. This was a big deal. But the excitement proved premature. Our understanding of molecular biology has increased exponentially since that time, and later variants of the experiment produced an ever greater array of organic molecules. Yet today, some 70 years after the original experiment, scientists are arguably no closer to synthesizing a living entity. We still seem to be missing something. Now, I mentioned the primordial soup hypothesis and the misplaced optimism surrounding the experiment, as it seems immediately relevant to discussions of AI. The claim in both cases is that science provides an eminently naturalistic account of the emergence of sentient life. Now, to return to AI, the claim is that as we continue to boost computing power and efficiency and refine our algorithms and expand the training data, some form of consciousness will emerge. Indeed, some have claimed that certain LLMs, most famously Google's Lambda, are already sentient. But stepping aside from the media circus, the consensus among those who understand the technology is that AI is nowhere close to becoming conscious, and that there is no reason to believe that the technology is even headed in that direction. And there are many reasons for caution. I had to cut this down, so I'm only going to give you a couple here. First, there is a popular but mistaken belief that the neural network technology used in AI is based upon the architecture of the brain, and more specifically, that the structural nodes in a neural net function analogously to neurons. But historically, this gets things backwards. The neural network architecture employed in AI was developed on the basis of available technology. It was only afterward that people touted analogies between the structure of a neural network and that of a living brain. In other words, engineers did not model computers and programs that run on them on the actual physical anatomy or electrochemical circuitry or logical configuration of the brain. After all, the brain is largely a mystery to us. Rather, we modeled our understanding of the neurostructure of the brain on the working of computers. And I will argue below that thinking of the brain along the lines of a computer, which is sometimes called computationalism, is both misguided and pernicious. But for the moment, I'll simply note that the architecture of AI is digital, linear, and stochastic, and yet none of these attributes seem to apply to the brain, much less the mind. Next, and most important, the reason that AI platforms appear to be sentient is that they can carry on conversations and respond to queries as humans do. And it's easy to forget that they do this because that is the task for which they were designed. Moreover, their design provides them not with intelligence or understanding per se, but with an ability to access and recognize patterns within an enormous store of data, virtually the entire internet, based on which they mimic a human response. And this, I submit, renders the Turing test hopelessly outdated. Now, the idea of the Turing test emerged from a now famous paper published in 1950, which was an attempt to address the difficult question, can machines think? To gain leverage on this issue, Turing proffered what he called the imitation game, in which an interrogator communicates via written text or an intermediary with two persons ensconced in two different rooms. Person A, who is a male, and person B, who is a female, and the task of the questioner is to try to determine which is the woman and which is the man, and the man's job is to try to fool the interrogator, and the woman's job was to try to help the interrogator, and so on. And Turing then imagines just modifying the game so that you replace one of those people by a computer, and you see if you can figure out which one is the computer and which is the human. So Turing's, his argument is that should the computer be able to pass as a human, given the constraints of this game, we're justified in treating it as an intelligent agent. Why? He regards the question, can machines think, in itself to be unproductive, as it seems to be asking us to intuit what's going on inside the machine. So the whole point of this game is that it focuses on behavior, and it's thus predicated on a kind of Cartesian understanding of the privacy of mind. One knows that other beings are minded only through inference, through observing their behavior. And so Turing argues that if I engage in conversation with an entity whose responses are so lifelike that I can't tell whether I'm talking to a human or not, then it's appropriate to make the same inference in that case, right? To claim otherwise, to insist that we should only attribute intelligence or thought to agents whom we can be certain to have minds, is to countenance solipsism, according to Turing. Now, much has been written about the imitation game, but I would simply note that Turing devised his test before the internet, when computers, much like humans, had to respond to queries based on a relatively tiny body of data. As such, Turing assumed that a computer capable of passing the test would do so through its ability to emulate human reasoning or thought or intelligence. But that's not how the current generation of AI works. AI has access to virtually the entire internet, documenting vast sweeps of human cultural activity, the extent to which Turing could not have imagined. Moreover, AI can sort through and recognize patterns in this information in the blink of an eye, so it's not surprising that, with this reservoir of knowledge, a computer should be able to credibly mimic a human response, devoid of anything close to what we would deem to be comprehension or theory of mind or a world model. However one might characterize the so-called intelligence of AI, there is no reason to believe that the underlying operations have anything in common with human understanding, much less with how brains work. Now, this is not to say that AI is not a transformative technology that will have far-reaching consequences. My point is simply that part of the current hype lies not only in what AI can do, but what it supposedly reveals about mind. For many, the advances of AI lend scientific support to a physicalist account of consciousness that has no truck with woolly notions of metaphysical dualism or panpsychism or an autonomous self or a soul. And this is where Buddhism enters the picture, since the Anatman theory, the non-self theory, is supposed to help us understand the phenomena of consciousness without a ghost in the machine. That an LLM can pass the Turing test, that a soulless machine can flawlessly emulate human behavior, is then taken as evidence in favor of Anatman, right? So this entire approach to AI is, I think, misguided. Indeed, I believe that computationalism, that's the notion that brain is just a sophisticated computer, will go down in history as one of the great delusions of our time. As we will see, drawing a connection between computationalism and Anatman doesn't help us in either grappling with AI or in doing justice to Buddhist thought. So my point of departure is the relationship between sentience and embodiment. Being an experiential subject, a minded being, entails occupying a particular and ineludible place in space and in time that affords us a unique point of view in the most literal sense possible. It is precisely that I have a singular and ultimately inescapable vantage point that makes me me and not somebody else, right? This is actually the heart of the early Nyaya critique of the Buddhist Anatman theory. The locus or the place from which I take in my surroundings, this here and now, is not so much a place or location in the world, but rather that which discloses the world. It establishes a ground, a horizon, a spatio-temporal extension. So in his poem, Burnt Norton, T.S. Eliot famously dubbed this locus the still point of the turning world, which he says is neither flesh nor fleshless. And T.S. Eliot continues, he says, except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance. Now, Eliot was a serious student of Kant, and this still point is arguably riffing on Kant's claim that space and time are not given to us from without. They're not retrieved from the content of our sensory data. Rather, the apperception of space and time logically precede phenomenal experience. In Kant's lingo, they are pure intuitions or synthetic a priori knowledge, which is necessary to give cohesion and structure to the sensate world. But taken in themselves as mere abstractions, space and time constitute a centerless and static block, bereft of a here and now. To arrive at the dynamic sensate world in which we find ourselves, right? In other words, to recover the dance, we need something else. We need the experiential subject to be pegged inexorably to a spatial here and a temporal now. So in short, my argument is that the subject of experience, right, to be a subject of experience, to be minded, is to have, or better yet, to be a first personal or deictic center, a point of view. Now, we're not limited to the first-person perspective, of course. We have linguistic and conceptual resources that make it possible to reach beyond ourselves and to imagine what things look like from another place or another time. Social life as we know it, not to mention works of literature and art, depends on an ability to place oneself in somebody else's shoes. We can also use the affordances of mathematics and science to construct an objective depiction of the noumenal or mind-independent world. This is the so-called view from nowhere. The ability to navigate among disparate third-person perspectives is the very foundation of scientific and humanistic learning, but one can't entertain a third-personal point of view without the deictic center. There is no mind absent the first person here and now, and no here and now absent the mind. Now, whether one thinks of AI in terms of software or neural network architecture, or as the machine or machines on which the software runs, it is not embodied in the sense that I'm using the term here. Evan Thompson made the same point yesterday. There is no a priori deictic center. Indeed, the substrate independence is a much touted feature of AI. Christian was just referring to this. An LLM can be, and typically is, distributed across a vast network of servers. Moreover, it can be translated into any number of disparate encodings and transported from one platform to another. The actual training and implementation of a modern LLM requires dozens, if not hundreds, of graphic processing units and tensor processing units distributed over huge clusters of servers. There is no center, no innate or inexorable point of view, no still point. And even should you manage to squeeze an AI package into a compact robot and supply it with sensory input, with an uninterrupted audio and visual feed, the input is just more third-personal data. That is, like a self-driving car, the AI derives its first-personal perspective third-personally by situating itself on an internal map of geographical and temporal coordinates. That AI is substrate independent, this is what Christian was just talking about, that it can be ported from one machine to another is used to support the philosophical position known as patternism. Patternism holds that intelligence consists in structured information that is logically independent of any particular physical instantiation. So just as software data can be moved from one encoding machine to another, the same is true, at least theoretically, of mind and sentience. Accordingly, we are advised not to presume that life forms elsewhere in the universe will turn out to be based on the kind of organic processes available on Earth. Now, patternism is, of course, just a form of computationalism. It holds that our intelligence or consciousness consists in information, and given technological advances, said information could be transferred from our brains to a machine. In my view, rather than supporting computationalism, the substrate independence of AI serves as a reductio ad absurdum that refutes computationalism. To be minded is precisely to grasp the world first personally, to find oneself ineluctably situated here and now. The myth of computationalism can only be maintained when we are so absorbed in a detached third-personal construal, so beguiled by what the Buddhists call prapancha, that we have become insensible to our own first personhood. Right? This endemic insensibility is a theme explored in in Evan Thompson's book, The Blind Spot, that he talked about yesterday. So we can now turn to the question raised in the title of my talk. Can AI meditate? Now, by meditate, I'm thinking specifically of the many forms of Buddhist practice intended to disrupt the natural attitude, to undermine our third-personal conceptual construal of the world. The attitude to be overcome is one that unreflexively imagines the world as subsisting out there, extended in Newtonian space-time, independent of one's own being. This is the source of our existential alienation, our dukkha. Since there is no way to locate myself in this third-personal construct without relinquishing the first-personal here and now, and hence the very thing I'm looking for slips through my fingers in the act of actively searching for it. Meditation is intended to disrupt this imaginary construal and effect a kind of figure ground shift wherein we discover where we have always been. But in contrast to us, AI isn't anywhere at all, at least not anywhere in particular. So when AI isn't engaged in training or responding to a query, it simply ceases to be. You can call this cessation nirodha or nirvana if you like, but it is the cessation of an insentient rock or a roof tile. In short, AI can't meditate, and that's because it isn't sentient. Now, some will no doubt insist that in evoking Eliot's still point or Kant's transcendental ego, I am not so much sneaking an Atman in through the back door as I am parading it through the front entrance. Buddhist philosophers are attracted to AI precisely because it supposedly shows that intelligence and sentience is possible in something that lacks a self, and hence a good Buddhist philosopher should be open to the possibility that it is like something to be an LLM. But I would suggest that this is a philosophically impoverished view, not only of AI, but also of the Buddhist Anatman doctrine. The Atman that is denied by the Buddhists, the soul, was the soul taught by the Upanishadic and shamanic gurus of the time, an eternal and universal soul untethered to the transitory, if not illusory, deictic here and now. The Buddhists, of course, reject this and insist that nothing is eternal, everything is in flux, or to borrow Eliot's imagery, there is only the dance. But as the Nyaya point out, you don't get the dance without the still point. Without recourse to some kind of deictic center, it's difficult to account for the cohesion and continuity of phenomenal experience, not to mention the simple fact that I never mistake myself for somebody else. An impersonal stream of discrete but causally connected third-personal cognitive states does not, in the end, give us the lived experience of being me, of always and necessarily being here and now. Here I agree with a point Christian made. So Buddhist exegetes were clearly sensitive to this critique, as is evident from their continued efforts to tweak their theory of cognition. One strategy was to simply add new components to their system to take up the explanatory slack. Many of these additions involve components that seem to straddle the impersonal flow of dharmas that comprise our stream of awareness, our citta santana. So exegetes offer us the Pudgala, the Alaya Vijnana, the Klishta-manas, Buddha nature, mind mirror, and so on, all of which are intended to do what Kant was doing with his a priori categories, namely provide a naturalistic account, two more sentences, a naturalistic account of the felt coherence, continuity involved in being a unique someone. Of course, for Buddhist traditionalists, these innovations look suspiciously like a heterodox Atman, and the legitimacy of these innovations has remained a subject of intra-Buddhist debate down to the present day. But those who defend these innovations recognize the limitation of an approach to Anatman theory that renders us mere determinative machines or biological AIs whose nature and experience can be fully explained in terms of causal interactions among dharmas. In short, for Buddhist thought to remain philosophically compelling, we need an account of Anatman that doesn't, intentionally or unintentionally, blur the line between us and AI. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Very inspirational. I'm reluctant to stand up, but still carry my duty. Thank you, Professor Sharf.